Hi, good afternoon. How many of you are teachers? Give yourself a hand, because you've all been through a lot. And the teaching bashing needs to stop, and it needs to stop now. It's just a game, and it's a game about the billionaires and the profiteers who are trying to make money, and they claim that students are first. That's Michelle Rhee's organization is Students First, and I say no. What she is doing is students last, profits first. My name is Kathleen Carroll. I served as an attorney for the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, which I know some of you are aware. That's where you get your teaching credentials. That's where you get your school counseling credentials, your library services credentials, your administrative services credentials, your pupil services credentials. Well, what I saw there was horrific, absolutely horrific. I did blow the whistle to a number of people, including our Senate Pro Tem Darrell Steinberg, and it resulted in a over 120-page state audit. And it did result in some shakeup of management, but it didn't go far enough. Some of the things I there were, like I said, pretty horrific. There was definitely many apparent conflicts of interest, nepotism and cronyism throughout, a seeping over of private sector individuals with government officials. What you may or may not know is there is a Political Reform Act, and it's still in effect. And that means that when someone gets elected, whether it be to local government, state government, federal government, school board member, they should have a neutral voice. They should not have an interest on the side, such as an education consulting business or a charter school, because over 95% of our over 6 million student population goes to traditional public schools, not charter schools. Charter schools have become a cash cow for Wall Street. We've heard today about the financial crisis. Well, guess what? Those people who didn't go to prison, they're back. And guess where they're tapping their marketing and planning and profiteering strategies? K-12 education, higher education. I don't know if any of you read The Nation, which is a magazine that comes out about once a month. In the December 2011 issue of The Nation, and hopefully I'll get some of your emails and I can email some of this stuff. It's called Selling Out Schools, the Scam of Virtual Education Reform. Within the article, it talks about a gentleman, Michael Moe, who worked for almost 15 years at converting K-12 education system into a cash cow for Wall Street. He was a veteran of Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch. He now leads an investment group that specializes in raising money for businesses, looking into tapping into the more than $1 trillion in taxpayer money spent annually on primary education. We need to stop this. At the commission, and I'm flipping back and forth and I apologize, but at the commission, I did see some horrific things, due process violations being violated right and left by the attorneys of the agency, investigating thousands of teachers without statutory authority to do so. Those of you who are teachers are probably aware that you have to fill out professional fitness questions in order to renew your credential. And there are those of you who are new student teachers, I don't know if any of you are in the room, you also have to fill out those questions, and there's these little yes or no boxes. One of the questions asked you, have you ever been the subject of inquiry by law enforcement in this state or any other state? Guess what? That's a violation of your privacy and an illegal question. Another question that is being asked on those teacher credential applications is, have you ever been the subject of a non-criminal allegation that took place on school property or involved children? Guess what? Another elite question. And that is how they have cast very, very large, broad net over thousands and thousands of teachers. And those teachers get their applications held up for sometimes years. And if they, some cases, don't get their application, they're being hauled out of the classroom and put on what's called a notice of delay list. And the statute is clear that you only get to put someone on a notice of delay list if they're on a temporary counter certificate, not someone who has already a teaching credential and their application is being renewed for a separate authorization. But they were doing it. They were walking the halls and they were saying, we're the government, we can do whatever we want, and they were. They were illegally discriminating against teachers. If they appeared subject to discipline, if they didn't like their appearance, they would suggest they needed a psyche valve. They had no standards or parameters in place to notice teachers of what offenses would subject them to discipline of their credential, which is a due process violation. They were biasing outcomes by picking and choosing who were on the committee of credentials. They were mostly cronies. They were assigning particular committee members certain cases. There was no statutory authority for having teachers on probation. You may not know this, but there are a lot of teachers on probation with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And a majority of them are on what is called drinking settlements. The Ed Code allows there to be discipline for someone who's addicting to intoxicating beverages to excess or addicted to controlled substances. Well, I don't know why, but no one's ever challenged that language. It's been there for decades, but it obviously, if someone has an alcohol problem or a drug problem, they have a disability, and that would violate the American with Disabilities Act or the Fair Employment and Housing Act. And even an Ed Code says that if you are, that you cannot be discriminated against because you have a disability. You cannot be denied a credential. You cannot be denied the right to engage in training to receive a credential, and you cannot be denied the right to teach, as so long as you are able to do so with a reasonable accommodation. But they were doing it right and left, and it was another money operation. There was an organization that's situated in San Diego that's set up to do drug testing and alcohol testing, and they were doing it all the time. One of the commissioners was Dr. Ting Lang's son. Dr. Ting Lang's son was appointed by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and confirmed by the California State Senate. And when I say public representative, she's supposed to represent us, the public. She was a charter school founder. She was on the board of another charter school chain called Magnolia Public Schools. On the side, she held a senior advisory committee appointment at Cambridge Education Consulting, and she had her own consulting business on the side, and her husband was the CEO of the charter school at Natomas Charter Schools. So much for public representative. Another commissioner was Chayne Martin, who's a former president of Green Dot Public Schools, and another commissioner is Marlon Evans, who is a partner of the KIPP Foundation. When we talk about, I'm going to get into talking about some of the conflicts, and there's so many, it makes my head spin, that I was hoping today to get names and numbers and emails, because I need to put together a group of people to help me map this all out. It is unreal, and we need to be angry, and we need to act, and we need to do something. And when I say do something, and I say, and we hear organize, I mean, Dr. Peter Pursley is here. He has a degree in education policy from Stanford University, and he also is an active attorney. He has put together a flyer and a sign-up sheet about the fact that there's going to be budget hearings from now until the May revise, and we need to show up en masse at these budget hearings. If we don't want cuts to public education, then we need to speak out, and we need to go to the Capitol, and we need to have our voices heard. We also need to have our voices heard about our governor, Governor Jerry Brown. The State Board of Education sets education policy in this state. And again, these people appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, should have a neutral voice. The majority of the public, over 95% of our students, are attending traditional public schools. And yet, let me tell you about some of the people that our governor appointed to the State Board of Ed. Dr. Carl Cohn, who is a faculty advisor of the Broad Superintendent's Academy, a board member of EdSource, and also served for the Gates Foundation. Ada Molina, who was the executive director for accountability for Bakersfield City School District and a school administrator. James Ramos, who was a board of trustee for San Bernardino Community College District Board of Trustees and a successful entrepreneur. A number of people that he has placed in particular key positions are either lobbyists, entrepreneurs, or involved in pro-management. Not a single rank and file teacher is at the table assisting with setting education policy, and that should be a crime. I'm going to start talking a little bit about the lobby firms, and again, my head is just spinning, and this is really what I need to focus on. Mr. Gerson did an excellent job talking about Broad and some of the history. I know some of it going even further back than what he spoke, including about Miss Jordan and Mr. Parada. From what I understand, is that Oakland Unified could have tapped into school bond money, and she disallowed that, purposely allowing Oakland Unified to go into default for the school to take over. Am I correct? So this is all purposeful, and it's all about purposefully destabilizing our traditional public schools, because guess what happens when that happens? If they have to close, that opens the door and opportunity for more charter schools. One of the things that Oakland Unified, San Francisco Unified has contracted with, and Sheila Jordan, who is the superintendent for Alameda County Office of Ed, is a lobby firm, K Street Consulting, and they're not cheap. And these consultants are essentially lobbyists. And the lobbyist for K Street Consulting has the Catholic Conference also as a client, Core Education and Consulting Solutions as a client, as well as the Western Association of College Admission and Counseling. Some of these lobby firms, and one in particular that I want to tell you right now, has some major conflicts with the privatization agenda. And lobbyists get to bend the ear of legislators. You and I try to pick up the phone and we try to call Governor Brown. Guess what? We're not going to talk to him directly. We're probably going to get some staff, some student assistant. We may get up a few levels, but we're not going to talk to Governor Brown. Same thing goes for our senators. But lobbyists have a lot of money behind them. They get to have lunch with these legislators. They get to bend their ears. That's what they do. And they show up at the legislative hearings and they influence legislation and education policy. Murdoch, Walrath, and Holmes at 1130 K Street in Sacramento is a lobby firm. Let me just run down some of their clients. Aroma San Juan Unified, Burlingame Elementary School District, Burton School District, Central Union High School District, Clovis Unified, Coalition for Adequate School Housing, Dublin Unified, Emory Unified, Emerald County Office of Ed, Kern Union High School District, Lenox Elementary School District, Merced Union High School District, Ontario Montclair School District, Rancho Santa Fe Elementary School District, Scotts Valley Union High School District, and Sweetwater Union High School District. Guess who else is one of their largest clients? Anyone? California Charter School Association. Exactly. He's an attorney. It is a conflict, and it's also destroying our democracy, because we are the many, they are the few, and I take that as a quote. I just recently attended Diane Ravitch's talk in Sacramento, and it was like attending a rock concert. I heard different views of, I think Sacramento might have been one of her last stops, but several thousand, 9 teacher associations showed up. And it was literally like a rock concert, and people got tears in their eyes. Teachers who wanted to quit the profession said, no, I'm going to stay and I'm going to fight. And we absolutely need to do this. We need to go to the Capitol. We need to organize through lawsuits. We need to repeal NCLB. We need to repeal Race to the Top because it's unconstitutional. It's an equal protection issue. It is discriminatory, and it needs to stop. In the state of California, there is a California Supreme Court case, and I promise this will be the last legalese that I talk about because I know that's boring. But it basically says something very important and that you may or may not know. But an equitable, quality education is a fundamental right found in our state constitution that all of us are entitled to and all of the students are entitled to. And charter schools and the fact that they're competing with funding makes it more inequitable than ever, and it absolutely violates that principle, and we have to repeal charter school laws, and now. In terms of talking about these foundations and how much money they're pouring in, I'm going to cite an article, but I hope any of you who have not read Diane Ravitch's book, have you read it, some of you? I'm on my 4th read, and the citations are so extensive. And the paperback version, which you may or may not know, has a longer chapter, an added chapter than the hard book copy, and it's actually less expensive. But there's this one article that I'd like to email all of you, and there's a quote that comes out of a magazine called Dissent Magazine, and the journalist, the freelance journalist that wrote this is Joanne Barkin, and she's going to come out with another article about teachers and their unions. And she writes this quote, and it's my favorite quote in the book. Can anything stop the foundation enablers? After 5 or 10 more years, the mess they're making in public schooling might be so undeniable that they'll say, oops, that didn't work, and step aside. But the damage might be irreparable. Thousands of closed schools, worse conditions than those left open, an extreme degree of teaching to the test, demoralized teachers, rampant corruption by private management companies, thousands of failed charter schools, and more low-income children without a good education, who could possibly clean up the mess? I wanted to read that quote not to depress you, but to give you a sense of urgency that if we don't act now, it could be irreparable. And we could literally lose any semblance of what we now know as a free public education system, not just in Oakland, not just in California, but in our entire country. This is happening across the country and, in fact, across the globe, and we must act now. It's very, very sad. Bill Gates, we have a sign over there, Gates, leave our democracy alone. I wanted to read, oops, I'm kind of unwired here. Do we have a, can I use a plug? The Gates Foundation is huge. It potentially is the largest charitable foundation in the world, which you may or may not know. It has $60 billion that they spend on advocacy. And there are a number of nonprofits that are being funded in the name of education excellence. They have all these wonderful, wonderful little names, task force to teacher improvement, but essentially it's all about the same thing. Gates does not do anything without strings. He and Broad and Walton and Fisher with the Gates Foundation and the Walton Foundation and now Viacom, they actually have a deal with the mega conglomerate Viacom. They're actually taking over the media. ABC, NBC, MSNBC, PBS, you name it. They have provided funding that is behind the documentary Waiting for Superman, which some of you may or may not have seen. And they are now discussing projects about weaving in storylines into your favorite television shows on education reform. Anytime you hear the word reform, run. Or at least know it means privatization. I'm going to have to bring this up now. It just, there's so many connections, and what some of the acronyms that they're using is distant learning. Distant learning is just an acronym for online learning. What some of the goals is behind what some of them are doing is really, really scary. And that's why I want you to read this article on Selling Out Our Schools, a Scam of Virtual Education. Because essentially what's happening here is this idea that we have a budget crisis. I say it's a lie. There's plenty of money. The money is just not going to the schools, it's going to the rich. It's a lie. And if we allow Brown to achieve another tax increase proposal, where's that money going to go? Is it going to go to the schools? Is it going to go for teacher salaries, for quality teacher preparation programs, as opposed to national Chapman Charter, DeVry, Teach for America, which I saw numerous programs being approved when I was at the commission because of the lie that there was a teacher shortage. There was no teacher shortage. There was a backlog of teacher applications that were being held up for years. And people were calling and they were crying because they were about ready to lose their home. They want ill-equipped teachers in the classroom. They want confusion. They want destabilization because they want to flood the taxpayer dollars, $1 trillion a year just spent in primary education alone. So I'm not including community college, UC or CSU, which they're also destabilizing. $1 trillion a year alone they're trying to tap into. What? To help the system? No, to line their pockets. And we absolutely have to stop it. There is no budget crisis. It is just a scam. I voted for Governor Brown. It was the lesser of two evils. We had Meg Whitman, we had Governor Brown, and now Meg Whitman, which you may or may not know, sits on the board of Teach for America. So it doesn't really matter who we voted for, apparently. This article that I want to read to you that's finally just got up, I just wanted to give you a taste of it. It's in the Dissent magazine, winter 2011 edition, and the title of it is Got Dough? How Our Billionaires Rule Our Schools. The cost of K-12 public schooling in the United States come to well over $1 trillion per year. So how much influence could anyone in the private sector exert by controlling a few $1 billion of that immense sum? Decisive influence, it turns out. A few $1 billion in private foundation money strategically invested every year for a decade has sufficed to define the national debate on education, sustain a crusade for a set of mostly ill-conceived reforms, and determine public policy at the local, state, and national levels. In the domain of venture philanthropy, where donors decide what social transformation they want to engineer, and then design and fund projects to implement their vision, investing in education yields great bang for the buck. You should read it. It's scary, it's true, and it absolutely needs to stop. It absolutely needs to stop. I mean, the amount of charter schools and private organization and the amount of tax dollars being funneled into these dubious so-called nonprofits is really, really scary. I mean, as I was doing some of the research and looking at lobbyists and looking at the nonprofits, every so often I'd say, wait a minute, I know that person. Who is that person? Oh yeah, that person's a school board member. But wait a minute, they're also an active lobbyist. And they lobby for companies like K-12 Inc., yet they sit on a traditional public school district board of trustees, and they're elected by the public. And the public doesn't know this. I drafted a letter with Steve, and I want to read you some of that letter, if I could bring that up. I don't know if any of you look at the Secretary of State site, probably not as much as I have done in the last couple of months. But there is one of the sites embedded there is the Cal Access site, where you can actually rummage through all the financial filings of the lobbyists and the elected officials. It's actually quite interesting. And what I found was fairly, very shocking. It's on UPWA, the United Public Workers for Action, but essentially it is calling upon Attorney General Harris to request a criminal investigation into potential conflicts of interest. And at the time, we were requesting for an immediate restoration of the Cal Access site because it was down, and there were records being deleted from the lobby site and the Secretary of State site. Business filings, nonprofits. Nonprofits were general counsels of County Office of Eds and general counsels of school district were slushing funds through so-called business and education alliances. So dear Attorney General Harris, We urge a request. This request comes after the gathering of disturbing information as it relates to possible siphoning off of public tax dollars to lobbying groups, nonprofits, and other business entities. This information, some of which is listed below, has been gathered from the California Secretary of State site, including the CalAccess site for lobbying activity at the time, which was mysteriously shut down since November 30th, 2011. It's back up now, but the information's not the same. I don't know if you remember this, but Governor Brown shut down a site that Governor Schwarzenegger put up, was the Transparency in Government site. There was actually one site where you could go to actually see a lot of information about where your tax dollars were going. That site's been shut down. It takes a lot of work to look and find where everyone's filings are. You have to go to the Fair Political Practices Commission, the Secretary of State side. I mean, it's a lot of work now. It's very cryptic. And after looking through all this, I can't help but think that Governor Brown wants it that way. The letter talks about the numerous conflicts of interest with key policy advisors and lobbying groups, including Governor Brown's newly appointed education advisor, Miss Susan Burr, who was directly involved in decisions and policies that have caused serious concerns about bias. The involvement comes during her time as a sitting member of the Education Coalition and also as acting executive director of the California County Superintendent's Educational Services Association. So she was representing the interests of superintendents, and we all have heard where they come from. And she's supposed to be a neutral voice for the public, giving education policy advice to our governor. Does it sound neutral to you? No. It doesn't sound neutral to me. The California Superintendent's Educational Services Association contracts with the lobby firm School Services of California. And then you go to School Services of California, and they have as their clients school districts, county offices of education, McGraw-Hill Education, and nonprofits as some of its clients, all of whom lobby the state legislature and other state agencies on education policy issues. As school districts and county offices of education are public entities funded by our tax dollars, this obviously raises serious concerns about where our tax dollars are going and who is involved in the decision-making processes that are supposed to be democratic and open to public scrutiny. There's so much more. I mean, I don't want to read it all, but basically this letter talks about the numerous layers, individuals who literally are elected officials but also serving as active lobbyists, and the numerous client. I did want to read a couple of them. Some of you have heard of the Pearson Education Corporation. The Pearson Education Corporation does all that mad, crazy, insane testing. And guess what? They are now being criminally investigated, thank God. In the state of New York, the Attorney General's office has started a criminal investigation because they were essentially getting together superintendents, other governmental officials, and guess where they were going? All around the world, paid for on Pearson's dime. And guess what? That's illegal. Because what was happening is Pearson Education is not just Pearson Education. They have other foundations. And guess what foundations? they're tax exempt. And the foundations are not supposed to be lobbying state legislatures. But they were going to Finland and Brazil and South America and all over the world on Pearson's dime. Let me just look up Pearson really quickly. Another issue I just want to focus not squarely on K-12 education. We have to also think about public institutions that are our community college district, our CSU, and our UC. The same thing is happening there. CSU system, founded by former state senator Gary Hart, founded the Institute for Education Reform. What do you think that was to do? To protect CSU? Hell no. Capital Advocacy, LLC, is a lobby firm. CSU Office of the Chancellor is one of its clients. But so is Fox News Group and Chevron. Chevron Corporation is currently appealing its property tax assessment, which you might have heard in Martinez, and trying to get the state of California to pay them a refund of $150 million, which will have a drastic negative effect to public services such as education. But guess what? That's exactly what they want. Destabilization, defunding, confusion, cuts. Why? Because it opens the door and opportunity for more money for these privatizers to tap into. They do not care about students. They do not care about quality education. All they care about is lining their pockets. I don't know if you've ever heard of the organization in Santa Clara. I didn't know if all of you were going to be from this area or not, so I didn't know how to focus what I was about to say, but one of the largest campaign contributors for charter schools in the state is a political action committee that actually started with Broad and others, and it's called EdVoice. And it was literally considered one of the top 5 campaign contributors in the 2010 general election in our state. That's huge. And I knew that. But what I didn't know and what I was researching was that the same lobby firms that were lobbying on behalf of EdVoice were also lobbying on behalf of other nonprofits that were linked to elected officials. I'm sure all of you, or most of you, have heard of the term Democrats for Education Reform. They have the same lobby firm, Trey A. Inc., as EdVoice. Trey A. Inc., Two-Hig Consulting, and some of these other lobby firms were all backing candidates for school boards, for city council, for state senate, for state assembly. They are pouring money into and they're essentially interfering and undermining our democratic process. It's just, it's really, really a systemic, corrupt situation. But we can't just sit and talk about it and protest. We literally need to do something. And one of the things we can do is start working on legislation, start working with organizations and forming subcommittees. And I think we're planning today to break up into groups and talk about the budget hearings that are coming up in Sacramento. When the senators and the assembly members are hearing, I have piles and piles of lobbyists and all their clients. It's disgusting. That's what they're hearing, and they're getting all their money to get elected. by these lobbyists who are going out to lunch with them. They need to hear from us. They need to hear from people who care about education, because as Diane Ravage said 2 nights ago, we are the many, they are the few, and we must win. Otherwise, we lose what's at the heart of our democratic process, which is a free public education. With students not being able to be educated to know just the basics of who they want to vote for, what they want to do in life, whether someone couldn't afford to go and finish high school and now as an adult they want to go back and become retrained either through adult ed programs or community college district. We need to save that system because it literally is the heart of our democracy, and an educated public is not so easily silenced. An educated public is not going to be easily manipulated. They don't want that. We must fight. We absolutely must fight.